Hello, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. My name is Peggy Tsai with BigID, and we are partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT CDO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers in a series of interviews. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Wendy Batchelder, Senior Vice President of Global Data Governance and Chief Data Officer of Trust at Salesforce. Welcome, Wendy.
Thanks for having me, Peggy. It's so nice to be here with you this morning.
Pleasure is mine indeed. So companies that have undergone mergers and acquisitions are often buried with legacy systems, lots of siloed data, and duplicative applications. How can organizations start to understand and manage their data holistically? And what type of architecture or process designs do you think should be taken into account?
Yes, I mean, every company I think is experiencing this challenge. I have often seen that show up in that there's a lot of redundancy. I'm sure you've seen this too, Peggy, where companies have like several instances of the same application sitting in their environment. And then we wonder why we can't get some of the out of the box functionality to work, or the insights that are built into those technologies to showcase their strength. And it's because you're having to do everything outside of the technology because you haven't done the integration work. And so I think the important thing to start with is, what is that North Star? And working really closely with like a CTO or a chief architect, but your IT organization, along with business leaders, around what does the future look like? Is the company going to integrate systems, or is there a reason why some of those technologies are kept to the side? Maybe the reason is because eventually the company wants to spin those off again. That's an important thing to understand before you propose all of the integration work, which is not for the faint of heart. It's difficult work. And so I think starting with, what is that North Star? How do we align that with the capabilities that are needed? And then starting to build out that target architecture. Is the idea that you're going to put everything in a data lake, for example, or do you intend to have a very federated technology stack? I think understanding that priorities on the technology side of the house is really important, and being able to do that together with a chief data officer is absolutely critical. So just really building that blueprint for the future, I think, is a huge priority, and being a key player in that is super important. So if you're a CDO and your IT department is building a North Star technology architecture and you're not a part of that, you need to call your CIO and ask them to have a seat at the table so that you can help make sure that data flow and data architecture is a key component of designing that. But also, I think it's important to be realistic. You're not going to build an entire new technology stack overnight, or even in a couple of years. So really thinking about, once you define that North Star and where the company is headed, what are the incremental wins that will drive efficiency, drive consistency, help the company to operate more effectively in the interim? Often those technology architecture transformations take years, maybe a decade. And so really making sure that the expectations are set around what you're going to be able to do when, and what the value is, but also what's left to do. I think a lot of times the momentum in these programs is really hot right out of the gate, and then it fizzles. And so just making sure that communication is there, the understanding and appreciation for what the future phases look like stays at the forefront. And so, just really have a bias towards simplicity, iterative progress, and alignment between your IT function and your business leaders is really important.
That's such a great answer, Wendy. I think everyone should certainly take that into account. My next question for you, Wendy, is about the fact that organizations are challenged with, being data rich, but insight poor. And that's a quote that I've heard from many chief data officers. And that means that while they may store and create a lot of data, organizations fail to take action on their data and get the right analytics and insights out of their data. So how can data leaders approach this problem? And how can they empower their teams to make more timely and more data-driven decisions?
I think there's a lot of ways to tackle that. And I'm sure, Peggy, in your role, you see this all the time with your customers and also internally in your company as well, just with the power of BigID. But I would say it's just really hard sometimes for people to grasp what the art of possible is. What could you do with your data? And so I think being able to step back and say, okay, we have all this information, it's sort of everywhere. We don't really know what to do with it. I think maybe starting with a core set of metrics and insights that maybe are either very difficult to get to today or are very inconsistent across the organization. I've seen that in many companies where each division may have an insight that sounds the same, but has a very different definition and a very different calculation. And so when the executive teams or the executive leaders are discussing, say, that metric at a board level or at executive committee level, they're talking about different things. And so just really starting with consistency and like being able to even speak the same language across the organization is really powerful. And so I think that really speaks to the fact that there's plenty of data that looks and sounds alike, but the insights are poor because we're not speaking to each other in consistent terminology, consistent measurement. And that's where I think data organizations can play a huge role in just really driving that common language across the organization. And so doing that with speed, velocity, making sure those insights are available when the teams need them. I think that's something where, the data office or an analytics office can really empower the organization to make really good decisions at scale. And so I think really starting with maybe a core set of insights that the company really needs and maybe is struggling with today is a really good opportunity to showcase what the company can do with insights that matter. And I think your point about data rich and insight poor is so true because, my gosh, we all have tons of data, right? Almost all companies would say in some level that they are a data company anymore because we have all of this data. We just don't know what to do with it. And so unlocking that for the executive team, making it simple, driving that consistency can be hugely empowering so that we can make better decisions. And then starting to look at things like trends. Do we have early warning signals that we can take action based on because now we have these core insights that matter? I think that can be really, really powerful for any company. But I would start with, like a core set of insights at the top, because I think that will naturally translate a bit down into the organization. And then people start asking, well, what else can you do? Can you help me with my other, my now 10 metrics or what have you? And so I think just kind of, you can start at the top. That can have a really powerful cascading effect down into the organization.
So large size organizations often employ team members in different countries and across many different time zones. They identify data stewards as the role to help with governing their data. What best practices have you seen implemented to increase data collaboration and data knowledge across teams?
Well, first, I want to acknowledge that I'm so glad you said stewards and not owners, because I think data owners was a great concept many years ago, but it's kind of created this bad behavior where people feel like now they are in charge of that data and they get to hoard it for their own use and not share it. So I do like the concept of a steward, someone who is in charge of helping to facilitate the usage of that data and really empowering the company with it. I think that's really an important acknowledgement and nod to the role of that individual. And we could call it, anything, but I think kind of moving people away from the owner concept is super important. But I think from a best practices, especially with a dispersed team, which, gosh, don't we all have? And isn't that the greatest thing? I think it's just so powerful to have team members across the world looking at things together, because it brings so many better perspectives and just diversity of thought. And so for a starting point, I think that is absolutely the right model. And I think one of the best things that can come from that is you have this collaboration across the globe, and making that the norm, I think is super important. So really encouraging different perspectives, enabling the company and the teams that are, all over the world in their various locations to have this spirit of collaboration, which breeds innovation, is super important. And as a CDO, it's your job to set that culture within your organization. And so I think that's one of the best practices I would definitely recommend is this collaboration as a norm, like as a standard, and this bias towards innovation in a dispersed environment is absolutely our responsibility. So I would start with that. And then I think just really encouraging transparency into the information. And a lot of times that's enabled through, councils, stewardship groups, people having coffee and talking about data, but mostly really strong metadata. So I think that's a capability that is sort of like the unsung hero in any data environment, is just making sure that you have full information about your information. Where is it? What's the definition? Who is your steward? What's the quality of it? Where do you go to find it? And I think that is something that really helps build collaboration and also trust, because now you can look at the source, you can understand what it really means. And without that, I think we're often relying on like road knowledge, people's understanding based on their experiences. And while that's super important and can often bring a lot of great historical context and help inform a lot of decisions, that metadata is really helpful to be able to do things at scale and also breed trust and understanding of where is your data. And so I do think that's a really important component of collaboration and sharing data knowledge as well, but facilitate that with the great work and knowledge that your team has across geographies. And I think that's a great recipe for success.
Thank you, Wendy, so much for joining me today. Please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews.
Thank you, Peggy.